Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. Another great week here. Man, if you've been following some of the work that we've done on the other side of the house with Doberman in particular for the last 3 years, we just wrapped up a couple months ago a 3-year project with the United States Marine Corps on essentially all kinds of aspects of urban warfare and emergency management, how it can apply. Some of it, which is the life saving of civilians and, civilian military operations. Others were honestly illustrations and helping them develop a process to understand collapse and confined structures with urban search and rescue. But it went all the way through the strategic approach of looking at A-scope and a lot of other cool stuff. And we'll probably get into that in another episode. But with that relationship, and big shout out to McTogg for including us there and allowing us to be to bring some of those principles in. 3 years ago, I think it was about, maybe 3.5 years ago now, I had an awesome opportunity through the Marines to present to the Special Environments panel in Los Angeles. And met a lot of really incredible people, doctor and writers from all over Europe and the US, and learn about those perspectives. I've had General McKinney on the podcast. We've had other people on the podcast. And this whole time, starting to work a little bit more with NATO and hear their perspectives. And I had a special opportunity about a year ago to go to the UK and present on some of those findings. And once again, just blown away by the professionalism, the outcomes, and really the mission of what all those doctrine writers from all these different military groups in Europe were trying to come up with, and trying to help, the good guys, as I would say, fight the bad guys, and dealing with the complexities of what we have to deal with. I am not an expert in that space. I've always been a civilian, and it's like I said, it's been a really special opportunity to be able to work with these groups. But what emerges from them is this really cool guy, Andre. And I'm looking at the screen now because he's off the screen a little bit. But Andre is the chair, and as the chair, he's a U.S. guy, but he works for NATO now. He's based in Turkey, and he works with this group constantly. He travels all over probably the world, but really across Europe, because I get to see all their cool messages that they share back and forth. And he gets to work with different cultures, different customs, different products, if you will, in trying to help the modern warfighter. And having his perspective and how he does leadership, I've been wanting to have him on the podcast for a long time, and so we finally were able to link up and get him on. So with that introduction, Andre, welcome to the show. Good morning. Yeah, well, you know what? Good morning somewhere, right? Always. Uh, I wasn't trying to blow smoke. It really is quite incredible to see you come in and interact with that group. A-type personalities is pretty common for military and emergency services. People know what they want. They know the priorities of their nation states. But these guys in particular, the group that you work with, they also see the bigger mission, and they want to do cool things. And dealing with different personality types and, like I said, cultures and customs, it seems that you're able to keep moving the needle forward. Before we really get into that, though, for the sake of my audience who may have never heard of the SEP, can you break it down just really simply, like what's the SEP and how did you get involved with them?
Sure. So the specific environments panel now covers 6 different tactical operating environments. So it started off with just urban, and it's expanded to include mountain, cold weather, desert, jungle, forest, and woodlands. And one of the great things about it is that, like you said, it brings these professionals from all across NATO and partner nations as well. And we have guest speakers from all over the place. And it really opens up the aperture of people's perspectives, and also their ability to tap into the different resources that are out there that you can work with as an ally. So the SEP started as an urban panel, and an urban working group. It was a very small thing. I think it dated back to like 2006, if I'm not mistaken. When I first came on board as just kind of the first official NATO presence in 2015, it was a just small like gang of guys with like minds to make the urban community better and to share best practices and things like that. And so when you look at the timing of it, it was really, I think, born of the uh, the Gulf War and all the urban combat that had been going on. It was about 2.5 to 3 years into that conflict that all these lessons were kind of piling up, and there was no real venue for those to be shared across the allies. And so that's really with the genesis of that project. It was part of NATO training group, fell under Allied Command Transformation, which is the kind of the training and doctrine side of NATO. And so when LANCOM, which is my headquarters, got involved in around 2015, almost immediately we started looking at it and saying, hey, this is a great initiative. These nations are coming together. We need just a little bit of oversight, kind of management, not direction, because they already had a pretty good azimuth set. And so that's where my boss was a British colonel, and he was able to get me involved. And I came in basically as his deputy. He was the chair at the time in this working group, and we just kept kind of pushing forward. And really, it almost turned into a marketing scheme, to be honest, because people just didn't know about it. It was doing all this great work that people just didn't know so much about it. And so what we wanted to do initially was make it more responsive to the operations side of the house. And for us, that first step was moving it out of Allied Command Transformation and into Allied Command Operations. And so it works more directly for the NATO headquarters and the military committee standardization boards. And so it falls underneath what's called the Land Operations Working Group, which is also chaired by a LANCOM colonel, so one of my colleagues. And so it kind of made sense to bring it all together. So G3 and G7 of the same organization led two of the more critical components of that working group. And so it kind of grew from there. And, we talked about doctrine in the opening, and you're right, it focuses a lot on doctrine and trying to standardize the book lessons, right? But what's the beauty of the SEP is that it looks across the acronym DOTMO-PFI. And so that's all over, US speak. The only difference is, I think, the I, which is interoperability. So not just doctrine, but we look at how units organize. We look at how they train. We look at the material that they use, and we bring in some exhibitions from vendors, things like that. I've got some great examples to talk about probably later in the show. Some really positive examples how we did that. Leaders education, personnel, how you structure, how you get workforce, things like that, how you use contractors, facilities, and really it's across the board. DOTMO-PFI. There's so many important aspects that we can address. We can't get to all of them at any one meeting, which is why I think the panel meeting that you were able to attend was really more doctrine focused, because we were at a point in our existence where we were trying to put together some more teams to look specifically at some new doctrine requirements. So yeah, it's a great. I love it. I mean, of course, I'm pro bias for them. So, but I it's just a great gathering of, like you said, like-minded individuals who just want to get themselves and get their armies better, and by doing so, save lives in the long term by making us much more efficient, effective, and lethal in a urban environment.
How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. What was fascinating to me from, I would say the strategic level, you said several things and I want to hit on them, but I'll just start from the very beginning here, is the doctrine writers and talking, doing those sidebar conversations and hearing the discussions that they were talking about best practices, what's, good, bad, and best from their own personal experience in warfighting and not just an academic perspective. And I thought that was so inherently different than a lot of the doctrine writers or the planners that I meet is that they have an academic understanding in sometimes in emergency management, and they don't have a practical understanding. They haven't done it. And how incredible is it that highly intelligent people were able to live it, but then able to pull back and from a logistical standpoint, okay, like let's figure out how this operates and how we operate in different environments. I will say .mil PFI. I had to say that about 1,000 times before I figured out what it was with Sean, because he would say it all the time. I'm like, what are you talking about? So shout out to Sean Rooney for teaching me a whole new language when I started working with those guys. But um, your perspective, okay, of what you just provided is really fascinating because from a strategic level, there are a lot of people who operate in a silo, and that could be military, that could be corporate, that could be emergency management, and they're not able to get traction and they're not able to expand. And yet, over the last 10 years, your expansion and influence has drastically increased. I mean, somebody like me in my world would never interact with somebody like you in your world. Let's be honest, right? And the fact that we're able to make those connections, and I always leave those meetings from you guys, and you think you're doing one thing, but I'm back here thinking, how does this apply to what I'm doing? And the project management can apply to emergency response. It can apply to how does a person look at a battlefield and say, what are the logistics to take this out? What critical infrastructure do we need? What critical infrastructure don't we need? How do you deal with one of those five eyes, right? The information warfare game. That's all those things apply across the board if you pull back far enough. And it really is kind of special that you're able to get the influence that you wanted to do. What was one of the first steps if somebody was like, "Oh man, I'm operating in a silo, I can't get any traction." And this is kind of high level, and I kind of want to get into more NATO stuff, but from your perspective, when you got in there, you're like, "Oh, we got to figure this out." How were you able to get that influence you needed in order to move the organization out into operation so you could get that influence?
So
Broader
the
influence, I should say.
yeah, no, thanks for that's a great question. I got to get in my Wayback Machine and try to remember how we did some of this. And by no means was it a one man show. So I had great bosses, I had great colleagues, and like I said, G3 and G7 of Landcom, we worked together on a daily basis, and then we found ourselves kind of in this new relationship outside of the headquarters, but we were still working towards a lot of the same objectives. Overall, it's just to make the land domain and the ground forces of the alliance better. That's
Mm,
the general purpose. It should be the general purpose of pretty much everybody in the ground forces of NATO, right? And and so that relationship was really key in how we were able to expand it. And so the Land Ops Working Group, our parent organization, they're run by the G7. They also hold semi-annual meetings, and at those meetings, the heads of delegation come from all the allied nations, and that's where they sit. And so you really have a great audience. I wouldn't call them captive because it's a little harsh, but you have a great audience that if you put the argument together well, they're reasonable and very intelligent guys from the nations, and they'll buy into it and they'll support you. And that's really how we were able to do it. And so
mm,
I think the lesson there is know your audience, right? It's first rule of public
yeah.
speaking. And it's
Mm,
really true. They make it a rule because it's true. That's based
yeah.
in fact and experience. And so the audience there at the Land Ops Working Group was willing to hear our argument on why we needed to become more operations oriented, why we need to look at .mil PFI in that panel and not just doctrine like the majority of the other panels in that working group do. And nothing
Mm,
disparaging. It's good work that they do. It has to be done. But like you said, you start digging at one little pearl of wisdom or one little nugget of information that you get in the
mm,
panel, and it spikes out and spirals out to all these different areas. And so unless you're looking at it from a .mil PFI lens, if you don't look through that lens, you're going to miss something. You're going to miss some impact that has on something that could be critical in tactical operations down the road. And so that's kind of the argument that we made is like, hey, we've got to be able to look across DOTMO PFI. We've got to have the involvement of the nations. You need to send your subject matter experts, and whether they're looking at urban or send some for mountain and cold weather, send whoever you've got, and we'll put them in the right place for the panel. But you got to have a voice on the panel. And so it's been pretty well received. There's always room for improvement, and we're always looking to expand and get members from other nations to come in that haven't been habitually involved, or get some re-involved that have somehow fallen off along the road, mainly because of resourcing issues within their own nation. They have their own priorities, and if I can't get an audience, or if somebody on the panel can't get an audience with their decision makers on resourcing, then a lot of times they look at it and they don't know what it is, so they scratch it off, which I think is how most of us operate. If we don't understand something, we're less likely to support it. So our job is to communicate it and get that understanding out there.
You'd make a great emergency manager, Andre. So if you ever want to get out of, running the world and Europe, all that stuff applies. And honestly, like, that's just good management. That's good organization, good communication skills, and so it does apply across the board. And that's why, like I said, like, it is honestly a pleasure every time I go, because I remember Sean the first time. He's like, "Hey, these meetings might be really boring for you because you might not understand it, you might not get it, and it might be outside your scope." And then one of the first ones was, I think, John Spencer going over the Russia to World War II. Gosh, why am I just Stalingrad? And then another one was the Canadian guy talking about Italy and going through that. And I'm like, every single one, like, mass migration, critical infrastructure, understanding, supply chain management and how weather impacts morale, even how to use civilians for or against, and how that all that stuff was so fascinating to me and fun for me. I just like soaked it all up. And I told Sean every single time you guys meet, I'm like, "Hey, Sean, can you get me there?" Literally every single time, because I just like learning. I like being in the room. But that being said,
honestly, that's what makes the panel great, is we're able to bring in folks like you who bring a wealth of knowledge to us as well. So it's a two-way street. By all means, you need to realize how much you bring to the panel too, and you're not just taking stuff out. It's guys like you, John Spencer, all the guys that have contributed over the years, and you came in at just an awesome time. That meeting in Los Angeles is the stuff of legend on the panel, right? I mean, there's still compare, as good as the panel was in Copenhagen. If you want to get under, Mullen's skin, somebody makes the off color remarks about it. It's not Los Angeles though. And it's meant as a compliment to Sean.
Yeah.
And how he put that together. I mean, it was an incredible panel meeting that he set up in Los Angeles. He brought in so many experts like you, so many authors, and true professionals who really believe in what they're doing and want to make a positive impact and make everybody better. And for him to assemble that, the panel Avengers meeting, basically, because it had guys from all kinds of walk of life that you didn't even realize had an impact on what we do. So, I mean, he brought in the forestry, U.S. forestry guys, right? And at a glance, because I'm usually the guy that has to try to explain it to people who are, one, not native English speakers, but two, don't have a lot of times that open mind and broad perspective. And so to get people to understand, why are you talking to the Port Authority? You don't own the littoral environment. I'm like, I don't, but most major cities that we're worried about touch the littoral environment. So Port Authority makes good sense, right? A Coast Guard interaction makes good sense. And so Sean was able to, bring that to fruition at that Los Angeles meeting. So your timing was impeccable to join at that time. And now we've got to live up to the Sean standard now.
Sean, funny. I'm gonna have to share this with him. His head's gonna get so big, but honestly, he deserves it. I was blown away. I've seen, people go all out before, and then what he provided was on a whole new level. I mean, I think in a single day, I went from looking at a shoot house with the SWAT team to literally driving one of the boats from the Coast Guard. They gave us turns of doing it, and but always bringing it back from like, this can be fun and entertaining, sure, in the moment, but this is why this matters. And I
Yeah.
think that was very clever for him. I know that at the time, because Sean and I kind of go back to Hurricane Harvey days. I know at the time when he was putting that together, he was really stressed because he wanted to essentially do 20-hour days, and
Yeah.
he wanted to go, go, go. And I think there probably was a lot of hesitancy. I was like, "What are you doing, man?" But I'm glad he did it, because when you fast forward, and he's probably just going to learn this now through listening to this, is that when we created dynamic populations class, that counterterrorism course, we looked at a lot of different models, urban search and rescue training models,
Mm.
war gaming models, but really it was Sean's model of like academics. We threw in some other stuff with training, making sure there was a night activity so it'd be fun but engaging and learning throughout the experience, and
Yeah.
trying to create a legendary experience. And that was literally all him by himself. I mean,
I know.
the
He had no
good for
supporting
him.
cast whatsoever. Yeah.
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 He's so mad at me to this day. I saw that you weren't there, and I recognized that when we were at the SWAT place, the bus driver started to drive away, and this bus driver, it was like this first time driving anything,
Yeah.
apparently, but he drove away, and I was like, "Sean, the bus driver drove away." And he's like, "I don't want you to joke with me right now. I'm really serious. I can joke around." I was like, "No, I'm watching the bus drive away right now." And so he starts chasing the bus, like,
Yeah.
and then but the guy was just trying to find like a new parking spot. And so he got all mad at me because I thought I was messing with him. But I was not messing with you, Sean. That bus
Yeah.
was driving away, and he hit like, 10 things that day. So whatever.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it was remarkable how he put that all together. So shout out
yeah,
to you, Chief John. Love you,
yeah.
brother.
Good man. Okay, so going into NATO, where we have about 10 minutes or so left, I want to talk about um, three kind of big topics. If you're willing to kind of do a rapid fire kind of moment, um, I'll end with the U.S. one. The first one was "Enemy in the Woods," that BBC documentary that we watched, and um, I had general feelings on that I didn't share at the time, and I'm hyper curious about what your thoughts are, and asymmetric warfare, and using now drones, and capabilities, and all basically your perspective of Ukraine's perspective. We hear a lot of BS from media out here in the US. I'm sure everybody else does too, but you have some more ground truth of how that's happening. For example, I didn't realize that there's 5 armies of Russia, and they were only using their second army at the time, and there was some other stuff. But so that'll be the first rapid fire. If you can give me a heads up on that one. I've heard a lot from John Spencer's perspective, and he's ooh, I was going to say something funny about him. He's definitely really involved with Gaza, and his perspective on that. But I'd like to hear your perspective from an urban warfare environment and dealing with an enemy who's involved with civilians. And then the last one, again, we're going rapid fire here, is um, basically what is the morale situation, and thinking about how the U.S. is interacting with NATO. Is it a bunch of fluff, smoke and mirrors, or is there like real impact? So Ukraine, Gaza, U.S. impacts to NATO. I hit you with three big things all at once.
Yeah,
So
those are some big ones. I'll try to address
yeah,
them succinctly. Which is a challenge if you know me. So the the first one, the Ukraine video that we were able to watch, and the whole topic of Ukraine, I think everybody in the leadership position, military and political, needs to see that video to
yeah,
understand what what our friends and our partners, the Ukrainians, are going through, what their sacrifice is. Like we saw in the video, and you hear the tales coming out of there. If you sit and listen to what they're doing, you can't help but be impressed by them and to really respect them for their efforts. They're defending their country against a foreign invader. There's
bingo,
no ins or buts about it, right? It was unprovoked. The Russians have their own narrative on why they did it and things like that. But at the end of the day, if we were ever in, God forbid, that same situation, we would want the outside world to know our struggle and to help us. And so I think that video would go a long way to influencing a lot of the right people. Um, and I don't see how you could, aside from being on the ground and experiencing it with them, I don't see how you could get a better firsthand account collection of what's going on and what they're going through. And they're fighting for their nation, but they're doing us such a great service by doing so. So if it were not for them, I'm convinced that Putin would be using those forces elsewhere. And that conflict has done more for the alliance in the last 3 years, and really before that, even going back to 2014. So in the last 11 years, that conflict and the Russian aggression and then all-out attack has done more to solidify the resolve of the alliance, and especially in the military circles. There's still some wayward politicians, we'll call them, that just aren't believers in the alliance, and I think that position is probably born out of ignorance and not knowing all the good that has come from it. And there are problems with it. It's by no means a perfect alliance, but it's one of the best that's ever existed, if not the absolute best. When you look at the perspective of deterrence and what it's achieved since its founding. And so I'm a big fan. I grew up fairly early in the NATO realm. I came as a senior captain for my first NATO tour, and then I've had multiple after that. And people who criticize the NATO tours and the NATO contribution, things like that, if you dig down deep, most of them don't have the experience with it. So, or maybe they have one single anecdotal bad experience with it, and that has shaped their entire perspective. And that's a really strange way to form your perspective when you don't look at any problem set holistically, or any resource holistically, and a relationship holistically. So if I only looked at a personal relationship, a marriage, for example, if you only looked at marriage in the span of one little argument, you probably had a bad marriage, right? If that's the only thing, but that's not what a marriage is. The marriage is, day in, day out, lots of good, lots of bad, shared struggle, things like that. That's very much like how the alliance works. There's a lot of good, a lot of bad. There's a lot of shared struggles. And unless you take it from the holistic view and see all the good and the bad and remember each piece accordingly, I think you walk away with a negative perspective. And so NATO has grown.
Yeah.
I think NATO has grown and matured unbelievably in the last 11 years, especially in the last 3 to 4 years. And we have the Ukrainians to thank for that. I mean, they have bought us the space and the time to get better while they sacrifice. And like I said, that video, I think, captures the essence of their sacrifice better than most products I've seen out there. And I think it ought to be mandatory watching right before any budget committee goes in to consider the aid going out to Ukraine. I think they ought to watch that and really meet some Ukrainians, because I think they're great people and they're doing great work.
I'm 100% in the same boat. I mean, I wasn't on the fence before. Hey, Russia shouldn't be there, and so defend your country. And from, I wouldn't say an outside perspective, but absolutely, totally understand the perspective of, well, if Putin would have gotten what he wanted and steamrolled Ukraine, which I think he thought he was going to do, he would be in Europe right now, like that. There's no question about that. And so their sacrifice has saved basically countless lives and allowing people to live a normal life while they're giving up theirs. And there should be a lot of gratitude for that, and there's ways to do gratitude to help. For the listeners, Enemy in the Woods follows 99 people who are protecting a critical infrastructure, a train line essentially, and making sure that's operational. And you can see essentially how Russia is kind of toying with them and sending people, and you could be 30 feet away from each other in the woods and not see each other, and a random shots get fired out, and then you see the drone impact, and you see a bunch of other stuff, and you see the impact. If it was my country, I would 100% want everybody to know about what's happening. And it is fascinating that there's even debate. I mean, you watch the thing and their body cam footage. It's not high-end Hollywood stuff. It's 18-year-old kids going out there and trying to protect their home. That's pretty incredible. The other thought I had, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I still want to get to Gaza a little bit, but I was like, okay, if World War II was going to happen in 2025, essentially, this is what that would look like. Like every idea or concept that I ever thought about, what would World War II look like now? Like you can see it in real time in Ukraine. Do you have the similar thoughts, or do you feel like it's a little different than that?
No, I think you're right, because it's conventional warfare with new technology applied to it, and so that's what World War II was. Over the span of 6 years of World War II, the technological advances that came to fore were incredible. I mean, just my background is an armored cavalryman. Look at the tank, the evolution of the tank from 1939 to 1945. I mean, just our opportunity in the UK to walk through the tank museum at Bovington. Just look, yeah, and from the first tank, the 2-man Renault tank that they had there, where you basically moved and maneuvered at walking pace, right, to a hunting tiger. I forget, like 68 tons or whatever, and then pretty much on the same size and scale as a modern tank, right? And so to see that, those are tanks that were literally maybe not even a generation apart, really. Maybe not the Renault, but certainly the first tanks that rolled into Poland uh, with Germany in 1939. I mean, those were still very small, light tanks. And then to see that same nation go from that small, I forget, like maybe less than a 10-ton tank, I think, to a 68-ton monstrosity of a hunting tiger in the span of 6 years. I mean, that evolution was crazy. And in the same, I think we see it in different areas, not so much with the tank, but with the different protection methods, the drone warfare, especially. We talked about that briefly in our warm-up session last week. Artificial intelligence, the use of satellites, everything. It's really bringing in what NATO is now, looking at as a multi-domain fight, and that's a whole nother topic to
Oh my
discuss.
gosh, I gotta have you on every week.
But,
Honestly,
oh, you
fascinating.
wouldn't want that. You'd lose all your listeners for one.
There's
So,
no way. I bet
yeah.
we explode this
But
week. Yeah.
it's fun. There's so much going on though, really, and um, like I said, I mean, you have the Ukrainians to thank for that, because they've not only have they bought the time and space with their own sacrifice, but they've broadened our awareness of all the different things that can be done better, and things that need to be done better to save our soldiers' lives, and to deter our enemies, and inflict casualties on our enemy when it comes down to it. I mean, you want to
Yeah.
kill the
You
enemy.
gotta win. I
The job
mean, honestly.
is win. Yeah, if you're not there to win, you're going to lose.
Well, that's how I feel like a lot of foreign policy has been for the last, 30, 40 years. It was like it was more of occupying than winning. And I read um I read a book by a general a couple years ago. I'm trying to think of the name of the book. It's probably actually behind me. Uh Maybe it's not behind me. Um Call Sign Chaos, General Mattis's book. And he goes through and he basically blasts both sides constantly of saying, like, people wanna occupy, there's certain, political reasons why we did it. It's like, you have to win if you're gonna do war, especially conventional war. And there could be a whole other podcast about that. I'm hyper curious about it. But for the sake of conversation, we talk about aid, we talk about Gaza. There's protests in the U.S. all the time for Palestine, and I'm okay protesting to protect civilians, but as soon as you get into Hamas is a terrorist organization. Screw them.
Yeah.
And so, like, I thought the Israeli operation when they used the beepers to identify, we'll just say
Yeah.
that, to identify all the bad guys, that was awesome. That was so
Fascinating. Yeah.
clever. But at
Yeah.
the same time, like, you hear so much conflicting media. John Spencer's on, I would say, a very one side of saying they're doing absolutely everything perfect, right? They are the good guys. You have to eliminate the threat. They're doing everything right. And then you get all the way through the other side of everything the Israelis are doing is wrong. They're horrible, blah, blah, blah.
More primitive, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
My
I
thought
think,
process, and oh, please
no, no,
correct me if I'm wrong, it is
no,
war
no, no.
sucks, but you have to win.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to
So
win. And I think at the political and strategic level, I think we need to put ourselves into the shoes of the opposing parties and say, where would we be? Would we ever launch a strike specifically targeting civilians? Well, no, we're a value based organization, the military, the government, and
Sure.
all society, really. We have a different moral compass. But that's what happened. A military organization, a terrorist organization, went out to just destroy infrastructure, but to just kill, to just
Absolutely.
murder civilians. And so if that happened anywhere, I mean, just remember when the planes crashed into the World Trade Center, I mean, it enraged us because there's no military target, no military value there at all. That was
Yeah.
terrorism, clear
Yeah.
and simple. And so how people can have, what's that, 24 years down the road, well, 23 when it happened last October. So
Sure.
when people have such a dis distant perspective and say, oh, well, that wasn't our civilians that got killed. That was somebody else. So I don't understand why they're so heavy handed.
Mm.
I think we would maybe learn that lesson differently. Maybe we should have been more heavy handed and better at finding exactly who was responsible and just clearing them off the planet.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what Israel is doing. And I think it makes sense why they're doing it. How they're doing it, that's different. I don't know enough about it. I'm sure they could be doing certain techniques better, but most of the responsibility, in my opinion, that's because the enemy is co-locating deliberately with the civilian population. So you can't separate them. Unfortunately,
like war sucks, but you got to stop it. I don't know. From a logistical standpoint, if it wasn't, let's say populations, let's say it was hurricanes or a wildfire, I don't leave part of the wildfire burning. I completely take it out. If when it floods, you have to remove all the flood, or it's going to cause mold and a bunch of other stuff. Like there's a logistical side, but then there's like the human side of me of caring about people, and I don't want anybody to suffer, obviously. But I don't think those guys are going away. I think you got to take them all out. I don't think they change. You'd hope that people would change, absolutely. But until they show real honest fervor and that wanting to change feeling, um, they're the enemy.
yeah,
I don't know.
they absolutely are. I
Fascinating.
agree. I agree with you. And that, I guess that's our transition to the topic of Gaza. And so,
Yeah.
I don't know if we spoke about it, but this last panel meeting in Copenhagen, we were able to bring in an Israeli Defense Forces colonel, and he
Cool.
spoke about his own experiences, and it was another time where you're sharing the experience of someone who's on the ground there. And so, just like we watched Enemy in the Woods, but several panels before that, the partner lieutenant colonel from Ukraine in Lancom actually attended our meeting and gave us a briefing on his experience. And so,
Wow.
Colonel Friedman was the Israeli who came and talked to us a couple weeks ago in Copenhagen, and it really helps you understand from the Israeli perspective. And obviously, there's always two sides to the argument, and the hatred is mutual.
Mm.
The acts of aggression are mutual, and it depends how far back you want to go. It's to oversimplify, it's chicken or the egg. I mean, who was the first? I have no
Yeah.
idea. But it's been perpetuating over literally centuries. So you can't really go and say, oh, well, the Gazan or Hamas started it, and the Gazans are suffering and paying for it, but the Israelis are now responsible for it. Well, I think that's a hard argument to make if you
Mm.
really educate yourself and you're aware of the history of it and also the actions of both parties. And so, like you said, pretty much everybody in the media has an opinion, and you're getting opinions more than you're getting the news and the facts. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm old enough. I'm several years older than you. I'm not going to disclose that, but
You look it. Yeah.
yeah, clearly it's
Yeah.
it's
Just kidding.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
what is it? It's, it's it's not the age, it's the miles, something like that, right?
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of miles too, not only
Yeah.
the age. But
Yeah. I
anyway,
got those
so
miles. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm old enough to remember what the evening news used to be like when it was basically 30 minutes to an hour at 1900, and my dad would, life stopped because you were going to watch the news. Like, God forbid the power went out, because that would spoil the evening for, for until the news came back on the next evening in 1900. But it was so different because they would read what happened. You didn't get an opinion. You were supposed to educate yourself, listen to the facts, and form your own opinion, and then take that argument forward and try to convince other people outside of the news. But the news was the news, and it wasn't in an entertainment industry. It wasn't an influencing operation. It was news, and we don't have that. I really don't think we have that in the majority of news outlets. It's an influence operation, and depending on who owns that news outlet depends on what kind of influence they're trying to achieve. And so,
Absolutely. I mean, it's
yeah,
yeah,
and
it's
so
information
I think
warfare.
and so we owe it to ourselves to get educated through many different sources, because every source could be, spoiled. And so if every source is kind of biased, then you need to look at so many different sources to collect all the different biases and form your own opinion. And I don't think a lot of people do that. And so that was part of the reason why we brought in the Israeli colonel to talk firsthand, not only from his personal experience, but obviously from best practices in a military side. And again, that's why I champion the SEP cause. Well, I think it's such a worthy undertaking, is because we're able to bring in those different perspectives, those different experts from all walks of life, and it really gives us a better perspective as leaders and as the planners and operations guys that are going to be involved in this for the next 10 to 15 years, depending on how old we are, right? And so I think that's the impact of what we do, and bringing guys again like you, and how Sean was able to bring in the experts. It opens up our minds and gets us to realize that that's a new way to look at that problem that I hadn't considered before. And the problem in Gaza is it's a tough nut to crack. I mean, you've got two different cultures that are just completely diametrically opposed to each other, and the existence of the other. That's really what it is, I mean, when somebody questions why you have a right to exist, it's hard to negotiate with that person.
Absolutely. I mean, what do you have? What are the options at that point? For the sake of time, and maybe to get you back on another time, we can talk about like the American, the NATO stuff, all that stuff in the future. But you're leaving it on such a powerful note where you're going through the most complex, the most difficult circumstances that can face the human population, right? Extinction, enemy, saving populations, protecting yourself. You're looking at so many different aspects, and going back to the original point from before, it really is such an honor to learn not only just from yourself but from the entire sub group, and see how it's applicable to other aspects, and potentially help out where I can, and maybe where our group can. But I don't want to miss this moment, because as we're wrapping up here, I'm looking at the time and I'm trying to be again aware of your time, because you deal with so much, and you deal with complex issues with complex political requirements, and people's personal agenda, even if they're all in the same mission as you. From my side of the house, we have that on a different way, right? Whether it's something is trying to kill somebody else, whether it's a wildfire or an act of terrorism. What would be your advice to the professionals who are trying to manage the strategic perspective of the planning and response aspects of those things?
It, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is really get educated, get a better understanding of all sides of the argument before you form your bias, and try to check your own background and bias at the door first, and then walk into a new audience uh, and listen to them. Don't just try to influence the audience like I talked about earlier, but also listen to them, because if you understand what their argument against you is, sometimes it's just communication, and especially when you're talking about people who don't natively speak the same language, there's a lot of miscommunication is possible. So, uh, know what you're trying to achieve, know what the other person's trying to achieve, and build that communications with them. And there's nothing. I've had many bosses and many good bosses, and one of my best bosses as a young lieutenant with hair back then was, he said, you can't have too much commo. And at the time, we were talking about radios, but he used it in multiple contexts down the road. And I came to realize he's not talking about the technical aspect in radios working and antennas working and connections being clean. He means person to person communications. You can't have too much commo. And I think that's a good lesson to take. And by building that communications, it facilitates pretty much everything you're going to try to do in life. As a military leader, as a planner, as an ops guy, communicate what you're trying to achieve, understand when someone else communicates to you what their challenges are. It's not an excuse when they tell you they can't do it. Maybe it's a resourcing issue. And if you're their boss, that's now your issue. You got to take that challenge on because they probably exhausted the means before they told you that it's a problem. And then
with that, you got to go.
Yes. I don't know what that was. That was just.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's kind of the mic drop moment for you because you started with you need to influence others, and you just ended with the way you influence others is by listening to them and trying to figure out what they're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish, and see if there's the median there. A lot of people go in there with a big head and a huge ego, and they forget the whole listening piece, and therefore they get confused when other people are not influenced by them, and that can be on a tactical level with your own unit, or that could be
it's all levels.
Nation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can't have enough
it is
combo. I
all
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, can't get enough combo. Yeah.
Well,
And so that's a lesson that I was taught early on in my career, and thankfully, and that's accompanied me the whole 27 years in the Army and 5 years as a NATO civilian. It's about combo.
well, you're awesome, and honestly, like I said, it is really a pleasure. I've wanted you on the show for so long, to be honest, because I knew you'd knock it out, and you just did. And I would really like to have you back on maybe sometime in the next 6 months or so, and we could talk about this kind of stuff again. What you're saying, again, talking to the audience here, applies to everybody who's listening in, whether you're dealing with nation states and enemies, or you're talking about coordination with your own city, whatever your scale is. In order to get things done, you need to learn how to operate in complex systems. And I think a great place to start with that is learning how to influence others and to move the needle. And quite frankly, again, Andre, to you and the entire SEP, it is a huge honor to both know you. And like I said earlier, we appreciate what you're doing for us, whether media is saying it or not. And hopefully we learn those lessons from other people who are doing the job right now. And we can not have to be in war in the future. But if that comes, I'll be confident we're winning because people like you have written that document. So thanks for all you're doing for us and for coming on the show.
Hey, John, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, to talk to the audience. I'd love the opportunity to talk more with you if you're just a glutton for punishment and want that. And so I respect you as a professional, and I cherish you as a friend as well. And so to be able to just have a friendly chat with you is invaluable to me. And if some good comes out of it that helps other people, then all the best to them as well. So thank you again for the opportunity. Again, the panel is better because of you and guys like you who come and join it from out of the blue, from my perspective, and thanks to guys like Sean Rooney and Ron Dresden who go out and find guys like you who have something to share with us, who can then impart your wisdom on us, and hopefully we go out and make our lives better as well. So thanks again for the chance to talk to you. It's been great. Appreciate it. Thanks to Amon for putting this all together. You got some great support folks there working with you. And I know that they're important to face behind that camera. So thanks
Look at
again.
That charismatic Andre coming out of there, of course, starting to thank everyone. You're such a no wonder you're so influential.
I know somebody's
working
magic behind the curtain happening, right?
You're working the room, of course. This is why I like you so much. But
it's communicating. I'm telling you got to communicate gratitude. You got to communicate faith. You got to communicate, to other people who are working their hearts out, right? Because maybe they're not going to hear it some other time. So they're going to hear it from me.
I should start thanking my own producer for all the hard work he's doing. We can see him off screen.
Yeah, well, I thank you for what you're doing too, because you're the one putting this stuff together. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, with that, if you got something out of this, the best way to show thanks to us is give us that 5-star rating and subscribe. It's the easiest way we know that you liked it. If you have questions for Andre specifically, you can reach out to us at contact@thereadinesslab.com. We'll forward those over to him. But of course, we'll post on social media. And so if you have lessons learned that you're like, hey, I have questions about this, or I've learned something in the field that helps everybody else out, keeping it positive, post it in the comments, that kind of stuff. And with that, we'll see you for the next one. Peace.